Thank you for joining us for this lively conversation about collecting. We are privileged to have with us today three outstanding collectors who are doing good work in our field. And first of all, I don't think either of them have been to Facebook, either party. No. I'll keep saying stupid things like that, like either, because this is a married couple and this is an individual. But they've not been to Face before, and I hope you're having fun. We certainly are having fun having you here. Thank you.
Great.
It is a jamboree of kindred spirits, and this is another reminder of the ecosystem of the art world and how we all support each other. Specifically, to my side here, Tim Newton. Over here, Elaine Melotti Schmidt and Stephen Bennett from San Antonio. Tim is from New York. Tim is accompanied by his wife, Kathy, who is very shy. She's in the back row. She'll wave. Hi, Kathy. Kathy is the fiscal conservative in this collecting family. So she's monitoring. Any promises this man makes will be evaluated by the lady in the back. So I am delighted to have you here and grateful that you're with us. And what we'd like to do is, first of all, learn about you and what you are doing as collectors. And then we're going to sort of pick at you with questions about the scene for collectors and how it's going to affect us as artists and other people in different areas of the world of art. We have quite a few, I think, exhibitors here with us today in the audience. So they're not artists themselves necessarily, but they're deeply interested in making sure that artists have the supplies and support they need. Let me start then by asking Tim to describe in summation your collection. I should point out that we ran a big article on the Newton collection in 2010, and I can give you the citation later. We've been in touch with Tim ever since in various ways, in particular through his leading role at the Salmagundi Club of New York, which is a very active venue for our kind of art. And I hope that you'll talk about that too during our general conversation today. But give us a thumbnail of your collection and when it got started and what it contains, the sorts of things it has.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Peter. Kathy and I started collecting really the first moment that's measurable is 1991 with friends in West Yellowstone, Montana, and bought a drawing, a beautiful large drawing that was a sketch from a Western artist, Gary Carter, cowboy artist. Fabulous drawing, and that has, for all these years, really has hung. It's down now, but until last year it hung, and that began a journey which, you know, an awareness and then an infatuation with representational art, and over the years began to go to museum events, specifically in Jackson, Wyoming at the National Museum of Wildlife Art. That was kind of the signature first place that we went to with our friends from that area, and started buying small works. That show, we didn't realize it until later on, but that show in those days, in the 90s, late 90s, it was a miniature show, and it was an invitational, and they had some of the great artists in America in that show. So it would be Clyde Aspavig, Bill H.F., Christopher Blossom, David Thimgen, Sherry McGraw, and so we went to that show, and that helped. It was so well curated that we were looking from the beginning at the best of work, and that was really the key and the foundation. We didn't realize that, you know, I just thought all art would be that good, and we had very good luck of the draw. So. 96, 97. In 1998, Clyde Aspavig won the Red Smith Award. It was Best in Show. It was the Artist Choice Award, and a little painting of goats in Norway, which some of you have seen on Facebook. It's 10 by 12. It's an absolute, utter masterpiece, and they drew Kathy's name for it. And Kathy said, "What?" we bought a painting of goats, and we did. And it also was $3,000, which we thought we'd fairly lost our minds to spend that much money. And we're not wealthy people by nature, and along the way we've had enough income to amass a nice collection, typically of small works, but we've had some other great opportunities, and so that's kind of a beginning. I don't want to go on too long. I could go the rest of the day, of course.
Well, there's a lot to say about that great collection. Roughly how many works do you have now? Can you guess?
It's about 350.
Okay, right. And it's in paintings
Yes.
and
Very-
drawings.
Very diverse. So paintings, I refer to that as the flat art oftentimes. A fair amount of sculpture, maybe all in with small and larger works, maybe 25 pieces of sculpture. Some really wonderful things. Drawings, love drawings, etchings, watercolor, pastel. It's very diverse and very eclectic.
Yep.
So that it's very, very broad. So there's almost everything is represented in our collection. So originally, a love of landscape. I'm often kind of said, oh, Tim's a Western art collector. Well, really nothing could be further from the truth. We have 4 or 5 pieces that are Western. Ulf Weghorst and some other great pieces, Tucker Smith, but even that's a landscape piece. But along the way then, we've gone further into still life and wildlife and maritime. Maritime is the significant angle. You know, we were born and raised in Colorado, so although we live in New York, we're native Coloradoans, and we're frequently in the West. So from the beginning, I loved things of the sea, even though I was a total landlocked landlubber. And so the real strength in the collection is a large body of works by Christopher Blossom.
Yes.
And John Stobart, Don Demers, Joe McGurl. It's a fine group of the very best artists in America.
With real strength as well in nocturnes and snow scenes.
That's right.
I
you
pointed
remember.
this out before. He didn't even recognize that.
Yes.
They're
That's
beautiful.
right.
And I think part of that has to do with the challenges of those two forms.
Yes.
To capture snow in all its diversity, and night, or dusk or twilight.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
I'm a real lover of
That's
nocturnes.
a real technical challenge for any artist.
Yes. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's
Yes.
very helpful. I turn to our friends here. Maybe you could summarize a bit about,
Can I speak for you?
Yeah. How did it get started?
Do we own a single painting with snow? No.
Oh, you're missing out.
Our collecting journey is significantly different. Our first acquisition was 10 years ago, and as we began to think about collecting, we gave a lot of thought to where we could make an impact and where we could find beautiful paintings. And one of the things we discovered very quickly was that you could acquire the paintings of the women artists, and you could do so for a fraction of the cost. We have a cheering section. A fraction of the cost at the time that you could acquire similarly situated men. And as some of our first acquisitions, we acquired a lovely self-portrait by Mia Bergeron. There is a lovely figural work by Leah Coley-White, WIGHT, who is an instructor at the studio in Caminati in Philadelphia. And it kind of took off from there. And all of the collection is comprised of paintings of women by women. The only thing depicted in our collection are women subjects. Virtually all of the work is two-dimensional. There's one sculpture by a lovely Cuban artist named Amy Perez from Miami. But with that exception, virtually everything is painting which would be broadly described as the application of pigment to a flat surface. So there will be works on paper, works on canvas, pastels, a lot of mixed media. I still don't know how artists put oil and acrylic in the same painting. I think it's a fairly daunting proposition, but we have some like that, or at least build that way. And most of the work, contrary to what Tim is collecting, most of our work is very large. So the largest work in the collection hanging today is one of the paintings that was done for the AUNTIE series, the Anti series by, I'm having a senior moment, No.
Aaliyah.
Aaliyah Chapin, thank you. Aaliyah Chapin, and that painting is roughly 86 inches high and 110, 12, 14 inches wide, and it hangs in our house. And that will be eclipsed by a painting that we just acquired called Ode to Feminism, which was a contestant for the Artemisia Prize in Australia, painted by a woman named Catherine Longhurst. That's a triptych, and I think its dimension hanging side by side is 168 inches.
Wow. Wow.
And it's going to be 9 feet high and 168 inches wide.
So just to clarify, all but one of the artists in your collection are living. Is that correct? All but one?
Actually, all but two.
Two.
We just acquired. Go ahead. You want to tell this story?
Well, we've been collecting for 10 years, and our goal is not just to have a solid collection, but it's to propel the career of figurative women artists. So we've been strategizing, and we have come to the point that we decided there are more classical women that are coming into the forefront if you look at what's coming up for auction, etc. So we're going to add to our contemporary collection by building a basket of classical
Classical
women
historic.
painters.
Okay.
And there's actually a lot of them once you start to look into
Yeah.
it. There's just nothing, if you take an art history class, you don't learn about the women.
So talk
learn
about,
about the
the
men.
latest acquisition.
So we just bought a Gentileschi.
And Artemisia Gentileschi.
Gentileschi.
Wow.
Artemisia.
Yes,
Great.
we got interesting. She did a series, and we bought one of her series. I know we were in a session yesterday, and they were talking about the validity of series, and I thought that's just what we did.
Wow.
Because there's more scholarship on series than sometimes individual paintings, and so we now have two deceased women in our collection.
And the subject matter of the Artemisia is?
Allegory of Fame.
Great.
One of an allegory series that she did in the 1620s.
Wow.
And
That's
actually, we went to Vienna in the high hopes of acquiring the Lucretia portrait.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that I am a person of unlimited resources, but the painting sold with the buyer's premium for $2.25 million. So we were disappointed. Disappointed.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted for Artemisia that there has been such a high price for her work, but that is definitely frustrating if you're wanting to get
400 years later.
it. Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Better late than never.
She's smiling somewhere. in
Yes, she
heaven.
is.
Better
She
late
is.
than never.
That's good. Now, for Tim, the proportion of living artists to deceased is roughly what? Roughly.
Probably 93% living.
Okay, right. Got it. And have some of those artists expired during your collecting period?
Yes.
Or you didn't buy historical art consciously?
Yes,
It
and-
was, yeah.
And while we're speaking of women, in my mind, perhaps the greatest, somewhat contemporary woman artist of landscape of all time really was Manfred Monroe.
Yeah.
And there are many who would concur with that. And she could paint circles around anybody. Sex does not matter. Generally, sex does not matter to me in collecting. So, but she was at the very, very top, and her atmosphere and whatnot. And so, Lanford sadly died at age 50 in 2000. She had a heart condition. But if you are ever able to see her work in person, it's astonishing. A large body of that is at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson. I think Denver has a couple.
Yeah, and you have a great example, definitely. Yeah, great. Well, I wanted to clarify that in terms of the demographics, if you will, of life and death and so on. I feel that what I'd like to continue with the Bennett initiative, could you walk us through all the exciting things now in motion with your initiative? Give us a summation of what's happening. I believe that the application period is closed.
It is.
Okay,
Call for
so
entries is closed.
let's hear about it. How is this working? Describe your program.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, for those who haven't heard about it, it's the Bennett Prize. Your lanyards, the Bennett Prize.
That's right.
And it's a prize designed, as I said earlier, to propel the career of a woman figurative realist artist. Well, more broadly, there'll be 1 finalist, 10 finalists, 1 winner. And we had almost 650 applicants from
Great.
46 states. And so we were overwhelmed because it's brand new. We funded it, so it will continue. It's going to happen every other year. We're in the judging, well, not me, I'm not a judge.
Right.
The judges are in the judging phase right
Good.
now. And then the announcement of the 10 finalists will be next week. And then there's going to be a show in May at the Muskegon Art Gallery in Michigan. I'm from Michigan. We're very pro-Michigan in our household. And
Except when they play Notre Dame.
yes, yes. And then the winner will be announced, and she will receive $50,000 over a 2-year period in order to help her to be able to spend more time painting.
Nice.
And I have to say, just as a caveat, we love paintings by males too.
Yes.
You know, it's not, we're not trying to make any kind of statement that way. It's just if you look at the statistics, it is absolutely overwhelming when you go to art museums, art galleries, what women artists earn. There's just currently an inequity that hopefully, probably after we are deceased, but hopefully that inequity will go away.
Yeah.
And but people say, don't you like men? It's like, well, yes, we do, but. This was our target. This was,
Right. Good.
like I said, we're trying to be strategic.
Great. So let me unpack this a bit further. So the 10 finalists will have works of art on display at Muskegon next spring.
Yes.
And one of those 10 will be identified as the winner of the $50,000 prize. And that money is to help them build a body of work for a subsequent show. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
yeah, there'll be a final. There will be a show of the winner's work created during the 2-year grant period
Yeah.
that will run concurrently with the show of the next successive finalists.
Right.
So when Bennett Prize 2's 10 finalists are announced, there will be a parallel show of the work of the preceding winners' oeuvre created over the 2-year grant period.
Great.
And so our goal is to do 2 things. One, to put the focus on figurative realism and to put the focus on figurative realism as it is created by women. And so the 10 finalists, all of the work by definition is figurative realist work. We take a very broad view of what constitutes figurative realist work, but figurative realist work. And so our hope is that you can make it to Muskegon in May and see the 10 finalists. The show we are arranging, there have been a couple of venues that have stepped forward to accept the show as a traveling show. So I think we have a venue in Pennsylvania. I think it's going to go to Pittsburgh in the summer. There's a couple of places. And actually, Reading, Pennsylvania is going to do at the same month as the International Day of the Woman, they're going to have their symphony do an opening that features the work of women composers. They're going to have the Bennett Prize traveling show exhibition in this same period, and I think there's going to be some other cultural events around women's activities occurring in Reading in 2020.
terrific. Congratulations. That's great news, all of it. I should say that we did run a big article on the prize in the summer issue of Fine Art Connoisseur this past summer. It was our pleasure.
Great article.
It was
and
gorgeous.
very
I
much
mean, the
appreciated.
images are fantastic, and you were so helpful with us getting it all together. And also, we'll do an article on the show in Michigan, of course, next summer, so that people can see that. And I think that everyone should make a plan to go to Muskegon in May. Let's all get together again and celebrate that show. That's great. Thank
Drinks
you
are
for
on
that.
us.
Yes.
The Lego
That's on
show.
tape, right?
Drinks are on us. Come on. Come on.
Now, shifting over here Tim has also been the mastermind of an exciting initiative called American Masters. I have the hat to prove it. American Masters Salmagundi Club 2018. Looking good. Thank you. Thank you. Feels good. Tell us more about that, the birthing of this exhibition and sale. Run us through it.
Good. Okay. So I'll be very quick if possible in the very beginning, but it's a great story that is often told and deserves retelling. Kathy and I were in Jackson. We started going to that show in Jackson because who doesn't want to be in Jackson in September every year? But coming back from Wyoming, we stopped in Dallas in 2002. And we moved over to the LaGuardia Gate at American Airlines. And from here to the first row there, I looked up and there was a gentleman that opened up a catalog from Arts for the Parks. Some of you are familiar with Arts for the Parks. So it was Del Braybach. He opened up the catalog, and I happened to be facing him the moment he opened that up. And I went over and spoke to him and said, well, you must have been in Jackson and you're going to LaGuardia. And, it's like, so there was an empty seat beside him on the plane. So I went to the seat where he was, and we spoke on the airplane, and he said, have you ever been to the Salmagundi Club? And I had never heard of the Salmagundi Club in 2002, and he invited Kathy and I to come and have dinner with them and in October that year, and so it was. And I walked in. The Salmagundi Club, for those of you who don't know, very quickly, it's one of the oldest art clubs in the world, and was begun in 1871 by 3 artists and 2 art lovers, and it's always been a mix of artists and patrons, or artists and art lovers. So they began that organization in 1871 in Greenwich Village, and it's always been in Greenwich Village. And then in if you read the list, it's a who's who of artists in America. And in 1917, they had the wisdom and the ability to buy the building that we're in. And so we're in a brownstone mansion on Fifth Avenue between 11th and 12th. We're just south of Union Square. The house was built in 1853. It's the only brownstone left on Fifth Avenue south of 123rd or 124th Street. So it's rather remarkable. And so they bought the building, and hence I showed up there and fell in love with the building, the history, and applied for membership that night. And after I was there for a few years, and I have to say, Kathy and I continued to travel to various art events and whatnot to see the kind of work that you're producing here this weekend. And the club has always had its member shows, and it's had outside shows as well, because we rent our galleries to the American Watercolor Society has their flagship show every year there, and many other shows that are outside rentals, and that helps us support ourselves. We don't have money. We've got a great building worth a fortune, but we don't have any money. So we
Typical in New York.
Yeah, right. We try and make ends meet that way. But because we were so accustomed to seeing great work elsewhere, and the shows that they would have would be good, and there have always been great artists every year at the club that showed, but it was not a strong body of work like I wanted to see, like I was used to seeing. So I proposed to the then president. It was Richard Pionk was president, and Claudia Seymour was vice president, and I spoke to them and said, would you allow me to do an invitational show that would be a fundraiser for the club? And I was nobody. I mean, a small-time collector, and not, I had no board position at the club. I was just a guy. And they thought about it for a week, and they said, okay, well, I will say, before I approached them, I had spoken to Clyde Aspavig, and to Sherry McGraw, and to David LaFell, and to Bill H.F., and Matt Smith, and I had a dozen people that said, Tim, if you build it, we'll come. And so I had those names when I sat down to propose the show. Long story short, so the show, first show happened in 2008. It was pretty grand, and I stole every good idea that I'd seen at every other show that I'd ever been at.
Why not?
These were not, it's not that I'm so smart, it's not that I was so original, but that was what the club needed. And so that first show, we had 65 artists, and we sold $412,000 in art. And they said, "You can do this?" And I said the same thing.
That's great.
I can do this.
Right.
It was good, you know, and the blessing there was that was in May of 2008, and the wheels
Yeah, you're fine.
the wheels came off of the economy
Yeah.
later that year, and so we were fortunate in the timing, because had it been any other timing in '08, it would not have been the same success story.
Sure.
So now, 10 years later, we've just finished our 10th anniversary show, and we produced a beautiful catalog the last 2 years, and it has raised a lot of money. In the proposal for the show, I said, you know, I looked at the gallery, which was rather embarrassing because it was decrepit, and the club has not had the money, and so the gallery needed lighting and everything. So I said, let's use this money to begin this fundraising, and we did. And there were a lot of other donors. We got a $500,000 grant from the Manton Foundation, who've been more than generous with the club. So we did a $1.7 million renovation to the main gallery, and we put in the glass ceiling, which had fallen in the 50s in a snowstorm. All new everything. It's a world-class venue, and so that is the story of American Masters.
It's a triumph, and there is more to come in terms of the renovation of the building upstairs. But I think I wanted to make sure we heard that story, because that is not only great for the club, which is an institution in American art life, but also the idea of collecting, that this program has brought collectors together in very enthusiastic ways to celebrate great art that you are gathering from across the country. And your program over here also is going to inevitably stimulate collecting, because there's a tension that goes with any prize. That's just human nature. Everybody wants to know who won, who's the finalist. It's just who we are. The Oscars are a phenomenon for a reason, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
every
Yeah,
industry
no
has
doubt.
got prizes of some kind or another, and you have created a new one that is very necessary in a field or a section of the field that is absolutely overlooked unjustly. For American Masters, this is about capitalism. It is not that you're giving things away. The artists are getting paid, and the club is benefiting, and everyone, quote, wins. But it's also a revelation for New Yorkers and people in the tri-state area, because that kind of show has not been done very much. It's a Western model that Tim brought to the East, and it's working very well. And obviously, we hope that more will occur, but you don't want to get carried away. You want to remain unique in some ways.
That's right.
Within New York. You
Yeah,
wouldn't want to see the club at Gramercy Park do it too.
There's a feature to the Bennett Prize that is similar to this, in that all of the work of the finalists will be for sale. When the finalist exhibition, our hope is that all of the finalists will produce 2 pieces of work, 2 to 3, that will be placed up for sale at the time of the opening in Muskegon. And if anything remains after that opening, it'll be for sale on the road too.
That's great. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Good. And this, to me, is a reminder that as important as it is for museums to collect art by artists we admire, it's also important for those works of art to go into private collections all across the country and all across the world, because that's the ecosystem in which we live, that you don't want to see everything deposited in one museum storage room. That's very dangerous. If there's a flood or a fire, as we saw in Brazil last month, it's gone. You want it to be sprinkled through, not only so that people can enjoy it, but also the name and the work of the artist goes on in a bigger, more universal kind of way. Let's talk for a minute about the hopes that you have for attracting interest among other collectors in art by women, not necessarily images of women, although that's very much a feature of your prize and your own collecting. How are galleries, nonprofit organizations, artist collectives responding to you and your collecting and your initiative in the last 3 to 4 years? Let's just focus on that for a minute. What kind of buzz are you hearing out there?
Well, I think there's 2 things at work. First of all, the Bennett Prize is not limited to depictions, figural depictions of women. Right. It includes both depictions of men and women. It just happens that the authors are women. what we're seeing and what we're sensing is that the women have been waiting for a very long time for the ship to come in. But if you look carefully, I think there's a watershed change going on. We were in Vienna for the auction of the Lucretia painting by Artemisia Gentileschi. And what was striking was the Gentileschi painting was in what the museum trade calls manor house condition, which is just another way of saying it's hung on a wall next to an open window with no humidity control. And it's in whatever state it's been in since it was hung there apparently in the 1840s or 50s and didn't move. There was a Diana de Rosa here, a window here, and the Gentileschi here. And so a rough condition painting at auction at the same time as a wonderful, relatively perfect condition Van Dyck painting of a gentleman with a ruffled collar in the true Dutch fashion. And that painting sold for 1.3 million euros at the same auction where the Gentileschi sold for 1.8 million euros. That's a watershed moment. The scale is tipping, I think, both historically and in contemporary terms. The New York Times this past month, within the last 3 weeks, wrote an article, the title of which was, "Want to get rich investing in art? ? Invest in women," is what it said. And it said basically that from a historical
Yep.
So the historic, and if you're watching the figures, or if you're paying attention to the market, what you're seeing is the women are warming up and getting very hot very fast. I saw where Joan Semmel just had a record price. We're seeing these crazy figures for contemporary living artists in great age who are still going. So I think the acceptance is there more and more. It may not be the women where the resistance resides. It may be the figurative realism where the resistance.
There we go. So let's talk about that for a minute. That's exactly where my brain was going. You know, our sector of the contemporary world has been relatively overlooked or dismissed or, you know, kind of, whatever. It's not cover of Art in America or Art News. That may change, but what might we do to work on this together? That obviously a quality show, as we will see in May in Muskegon, is a good thing. That you always want to put great quality out in front, whatever genre, whatever mode of art you're in. That show may travel, if I understood you correctly.
Yes, it does.
And that's great, because then it becomes a flagship in other regions of the country. But there will be some people out there who say, that's all very nice about the women, but we don't like this kind of work because it reminds us of Rembrandt or whatever. You know, how do we work on that? How do you address that when your friends say, oh, what an interesting collection? Why?
Well, one of the things that I think is happening is there is a whole subset of galleries that represent this work and do so very effectively. Look, there is a subset of galleries that aren't interested in this kind of work, and that's okay too. We don't have to chase Damien Hirst to be successful. I think one of the things that's happening is, as historical realist painters continue, I mean, the last Da Vinci is not an abstraction. And if you look at where the historical market has continued to reside, it's in figurative realist works, and we ought to continue to harvest that. There's some great galleries out there that represent this work. Gary Haynes is here. What a great gallery he runs. And, you know, we bought a lot of paintings from Gary. And, you know, there's a whole series of places that specialize in this. That's one thing. I think the other thing is, we intend to make the Gentileschi available for loan to museums hopefully with the understanding that we'd like you to show some of these contemporary folks too. And where the resistance resides, I think, is in a whole generation of curators who were trained in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when it was square to display and promote realism. And I think that resistance is generational. I think it's breaking down. I think there is another wave of curators coming. Look, we got some great art schools out there producing great realists in America. You know, we talked about hundreds of atelier schools. You know, you can name a bunch of them. They're doing great things. Let's continue to partner with those places to get that work in front, and particularly in the institutions. That's where the action is.
Let's come over to Salmagundi, if we can. Obviously, that is a gathering place for people who make art, who love art. Its great asset is that it's in New York. Its great challenge is that it's in New York, right?
That's right.
That,
Yes.
you know, it's a city that has the word new in its name. So there's always that, I'm not so sure about this. Didn't they do this in 1871? Why are they still doing it now? You know, so there's that. But you're in an amazing location, and downtown is where you want to be. I mean, uptown is so dead by comparison. So you all stuck it out and didn't sell the building, which was the smartest thing.
Yes.
But how are you all working on this in terms of building collectors within not just American Masters, but all the time?
Well, the most significant thing that we've done recently has been led really by Elizabeth Spencer. She's been a real force. She's first vice president of the club and a dear friend of ours. And she has gotten us integrated and very involved with the Greenwich Village Historical Society and the Society for Preservation there. And Greenwich Village is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the world. The people that live in the village are at the very top of the economic scale. And we held an open house December 8th it was, this past year, where we had, it was specifically for the Greenwich Village Society. And we had about 480 people from the village that came in. And I had personal fun that day. I just was the greeter on the outside of the building. So I stood at the top of the stairs and for the entire afternoon, and it was just a great joy. And so you'd see them walking up toward the building, and they'd look up, and we have a rather elegant and imposing brownstone stairs. It's double wide, and they're just grand. But the downside of that is they are imposing, and people think, they see the word club, which I have really tried to drop from my vernacular because that's clubby, and we're really not. We're very open. It's to be clear, just a point of clarification, we're a private club, but we're not for profit, and we're completely open. So if you're in New York City and you want to come in, the public can come in.
Walk in.
We have public hours from 1 to 6 every day, and that's most every day of the year. But people still don't know. And so, you know, to your question about the battle that we fight and whatnot, so all of those people that came in that day, they would come and I'd say, welcome to Salmagundi, and they would say, you know, I walk past here, you know, 10 times a day. I never knew I could come in. Now, we always have signage, I have to say, always prominent signage that says, welcome, open to the public, you know, public sale, public auction.
They don't read it.
I just really want to say, can't you read? But I did not do that. I did not do that. But wanted to, because it's like, come on. And so the challenge is getting them in the door, exposing them to the beautiful representational art that we have. We have a permanent collection that's glorious, and increasingly, post-American Masters for many years, the level of art that's displayed by members and non-members exhibiting at the club is really way up from the days when it was just the neighborhood art club. Again, every organization goes through ups and downs, and so not to be critical, but every organization does that. So that's a specific thing that we've done.
Open doors.
And we're doing more things. I did a talk recently on the history of the club, and they contacted me and they want me to give that talk to their membership.
Great.
So we'll plan that talk on a time when we've got a special certain great show in the building. So then we bring that crowd in, say this art is available, and we educate them about the beauties of the world that we live in.
Great. I wonder, for you, has there been one or several venues that are especially meaningful to you in terms of learning about this kind of art, past or present? Now, you're an art historian, if I'm not mistaken. Elaine, is that, well, you're a PhD. I thought you in art.
Education.
Education,
I was
sorry.
a principal.
Okay, sorry, I got that
That's
wrong.
all right.
But what I'm getting at is in San Antonio, perhaps, is there a museum or an organization that has been especially helpful in opening up you or people you know to the joys of contemporary realist art? I can't think of one offhand. Like, there's.
Shall we give a direct answer?
No.
No. No.
Okay.
No.
No help at all.
Fine.
No.
Got it.
But
I mean, so where would one in that region go to look, if at all? The Greenhouse Gallery was there for a long time.
It was.
It's gone.
It's gone.
I don't know if the Briscoe Museum, the Western Museum.
The Briscoe Museum is right in the wheelhouse.
Okay.
Tim's interest.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
and it's truly a realist.
Yes.
A realist museum,
True.
and it's not interested in figurative realism in quite the same sense that
Right.
we would be interested in it. But if you're into the American West, the cowboy tradition, the wide open spaces of the Great Northwest, that sort of thing, it very positive and a very important force, I think.
Okay.
In terms of where the action is in this space, I think there's a whole series of private galleries that have emerged as sales agents for this kind of work, and they're very powerful.
Across the country.
Across the country.
So what I hear you saying then is that this is not so much about a particular city or region, it's a national thing, and that you're in touch by email, through visits when you go visit New York or LA or whatever it might be.
Yes, of course.
Great, that's fine. And they have you on their mailing lists, of course.
And the Midwest.
And the
I have
Midwest.
to say the Midwest, Chicago.
Okay, good.
Chicago.
A lot of action in Chicago.
Okay.
And frankly, it's interesting. It's not just limited to the United States. The greatest single place outside the United States today that's promoting figurative realism by women painters is Australia.
Yeah.
And there's some fabulous work going on there. There's an article in there somewhere.
Okay, good. I'll do the field trip. Now, let's talk about poets and artists, because Elaine is involved in that very actively. There's a curating gig coming up, right? In the
Yes.
spring?
Yes, we're curating, Steve and I, for the first time.
I don't like that one. Why do you like that one? I don't like it.
Don't like what? Yeah, yeah.
That's the
We're
debate.
curating an art show together for Poets and Artists magazine, and it is called Figural Diptychs, Secondary Meanings. And it has to be a diptych or a triptych or multi-pieces put together. And it does not have to be by women or of women. I did a show last year, and everybody kept saying, but men can't contribute or submit. And I said, no, yes, they can.
Sure.
It's for anybody.
Okay.
And it's going to show at the Zalby Center in Chicago, and the opening is also in May.
You're going to be busy that month.
May was a very busy month
Wow.
for us, but I think the submission deadline is the end of February.
Okay.
Yes, I
The
think
end of
so.
February.
End of February.
And
Multi-piece, multi-figure work.
May I just give one little hint from having curated all of one show before? Have professional photographs. If you're going to submit, please. And also, if they ask for a photograph to give the scale of the painting, if you can't do that, at least give the dimensions. Because there were pieces, I was a special ed teacher who became an administrator, so I'm a very patient person. I tracked people down last year, and Steve was saying, I wouldn't bother. If they didn't do it, forget it.
The rules were clear.
The rules were clear. So just for your own best interest. Even last week, I asked an artist to send their portfolio, and the person said, well, they're not professional grade photographs. And so, we glanced at them, but you're not going to spend your money unless you can really see what it looks like.
Thank you for saying that.
Oh,
This is from a collector and a curator. Yesterday, we had a knockout talk from Carolyn Edlund in the talk stage about this problem.
Yes.
She specified the size of the photo digitally, this big. One story of an artist who was going to get on a cover of a magazine, couldn't provide a photo, didn't get the cover. What the hell? I mean,
Really?
what planet are you living on?
Yeah.
Get the photo. I mean, just don't let it leave your studio
Yeah.
until it's properly photographed. Don't.
Right.
Just don't sell it. Don't send it in until you have it photographed. So it just
Or-
makes me crazy because it's so easy these days.
Yes.
And the scale thing is great too. She showed examples of people
Yes, it is.
standing next to the work to give a sense of scale. Very helpful. Yeah.
Well, and if you do let it go to a collector, honestly, contact them. Will you have a high-res photo taken and sent to me because it's going to be in a magazine? As collectors, that's good for our collection. We're willing to do that.
Of course.
So don't miss any opportunity like that for like the lady said yesterday, Zappos, if you're buying on Zappos, it has every view of the shoe. And I thought, yes.
Of course.
This
course it
makes
does.
sense. You're not going to buy a pair of shoes unless you can see the top, the bottom, and the side. Same with the painting. I thought it was excellent advice.
Wasn't that great?
It
Yeah,
was.
Great job. Yeah. And she offers artsyshark.com. It's all there on her website. Let's come back to a few terms that you used. Poets and artists. Some people may not know their work. Just give us a thumbnail. Zauby Art Center in Chicago, which is
Okay.
amazing, right?
Yes, it
And also,
is.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Women Painting Women Initiative, which is a traveling tour thing that you're not that involved in formally, but of course you know a lot of the artists and the organizers. So
Yeah.
in any order you wish, give us your thumbnail descriptions.
Well, poets and artists, I'll take poets and artists.
Okay.
And Zauby, you
Sure,
take-
you're the
okay.
poet.
Oh, I'm not the poet. Stop, that's how it is. Never mind. Poets and Artists it's a group that is on Patreon, and it's run by Didi Menendez, and for $5 or $10 a month, you can contribute, and she tries to form community and put out calls. She does shows, but she also gives people information on shows. There are a lot of women in this room that actually have become Facebook friends because of Poets and Artists. People post their work. And so and she'll help with kind of the marketing side of things a little bit. And so it's a real good service. I think the one caveat I have is she has more energy than the four of us on the stage. So you could get 140 emails by 7 in the morning. And so you have to kind of figure out a system so that you can know what you have to filter.
Manage the input.
Manage the input. That's my caveat on that. I see some people shaking their head because it's true, because people are saying, I give up because there's too many. But then you
want
miss
to
some
talk about
important
Zauby
stuff.
for a second?
Zauby is a warehouse in Chicago that the Zauby brothers, who are Chinese artists, painters, purchased. And on the first floor, they show their work, which is massive. They also have a center in Shanghai, or
Yes,
Beijing.
Beijing.
Beijing. And then on the second floor, it's a gallery space where poets and artists hold shows, but they hold other shows there too. And then the third and fourth floors, and in the basement, they have artist studios. So it's a community. So the opening night for the show we had last year, because all the artist studios are open, we had
2,000.
2,000 people,
Wow.
I think, walk
Great.
through, but they're used to walking through because it's an event. then
And
you
as
can
far
take
as
everyone.
as far as women painting women are concerned, The Women Painting Women movement started probably now 10 or 15 years ago. It was started by a group of women who wanted to be together, and so they kind of organized a trip. Terry Strickland, Aaliyah El-Bermani, Mia Bergeron, names you would know. Since then, it is caught on to the point where now October and November have tended to be, for most commercial galleries, kind of women painting women exhibition. RJD in New York just had women painting women and men painting men, which was a new twist on the idea. But the Women Painting Women movement got its start. The women then created a blog post and then started showcasing their work, and now that has kind of ballooned into a series of exhibitions that tend to run in the fall all over the country. A number of galleries have done it. I think, Haynes, you did it, didn't you, Gary? Sure. And some great shows there. And so what I would say to you is, if you're not part of that or not into that, go look around a little bit online. The online presence is really propelling both the women and the figurative realist opportunities very successfully. Stuff that the arbiters of taste in museums and galleries would edit out. They can't edit the internet, and so it's bleeding through whether somebody in a curatorial or a gallery director position likes it or not. And let's face it, the internet and social media are slowly but surely eclipsing all of the traditional gateways through which we acquired our information about art and artists.
Hear, hear. That's a fact. So notice that I'm not peppering these folks with questions about where do you find nice things? I mean, the answer is the internet, and of course they have their favorite venues to go to. They have relationships with artists, they have galleries and so on. But that is perhaps for another day. If you wanted to get down to the details, we can approach them later after this conversation for tips. I'd rather open up the floor to questions from the audience before we sign off at noon. We don't want to keep you from lunch, so we're going to, I saw a hand go up back there. Yes?
Yes, I have a question about the Bennett Prize. I have seen that there's a restriction that if the artist has sold something for more than $25,000, she's restricted from being involved. And I'm curious if the next go-round you would consider dropping that, opening it up to some women who may have some very successful sales, but who still would like to have one.
The infinite difficulty with the Bennett Prize definitionally was, the definition we lit on was to propel the careers of women who have not achieved full professional recognition. And then you go from that strategic concept to tactics, and you say, how do we make this tactically work? And the answer we came up with was, has not sold a painting at retail for $25,000 or more. Certainly you've reached full professional recognition if somebody's willing to pay $25,000 for a given work. The question has been more, less, more. I will tell you, I personally looked at all 650 entries. The great bulk of the women have never come close to 25,000, and frankly, the ones that have come close don't necessarily eclipse in any professional sense the women who have sold for lesser money. So I don't think that the $2,000 or $5,000 painting is disadvantaged by the $25,000 rule. But $25,000 is a pretty broad tent that allows a lot of people to enter, and that's why we did it.
Other questions or comments out there? Yes, the diptych show?
Oh, the
Could you
diptych.
describe
She's
that
asked for
again?
the name.
It's called Secondary Meanings. And you can find information on submission at the Poets Artists. I think she just goes poetsartist.com. And then there's call for submissions. You're welcome.
Google figural diptychs, secondary meanings, and it takes you right to the call for entries.
That's it.
Yeah, I think it takes you, you Google that, and first thing that pops up.
Gary?
Do you have any sculptors in the submission for the Bennett Prize sculptures?
The Bennett Prize is limited by its terms to the application of pigment to a two-dimensional surface. Figural diptychs, on the other hand, although it sounds like a painting show, is also open to sculpture. If there are multi-sculptural works that fit together in some coherent way, bring it on.
Is there a reason you don't have more sculpture in your collection?
The answer is you got to pick the hill you're going to die on, and we pick painting.
So we're looking for one more.
We're finishing up now. I just want to ask Tim, American Masters, next edition, October 2019?
2020.
20, okay.
We're going to go every 2 years now.
2 years,
That's,
okay.
That's the plan at the moment.
Okay.
It feels real good to me.
I bet.
He gets a breather. Okay, got it. We just want to
Thank you.
look forward. Just to say the conversation will continue tonight at 6 o'clock. There are several fabulous artists joining me on stage to talk about how artists can better connect with collectors. So the other side of the story. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you very much.